Good morning, my friends. My name is Peter Husey, and on behalf of the Air Force Association Mitchell Institute and our partners ROA and NDIA, as well as the Marshall Institute, I want to thank you for being here this morning. I want to also thank my partner, Kath Ryan, as well as our sponsors that are here today and our friends and colleagues in the U.S. Armed Forces. Thank you for being here as well. Our next breakfasts are the 12th of May with Clark Murdoch of CSIS, who is going to be talking about his new book on nuclear issues. On the 13th, we will have the soft-spoken General Harensack. And yesterday, we were going to have General Chambers and Elbridge Colby. We have got a new date for them, and that's June 25th. Now, that's also when General Weinstein is meant to speak, but he has decided that he wants to speak at my September Triad event here in Washington. So he will be joining Terry Benedict on a panel on the 17th of September. We'll have the entire floor here. We'll have about 200 people for that event. So those of you interested in our Triad event, which is going to feature the new Global Strike Command Commander, General Brand, is going to be our keynote speaker. Former Strat Commander General Kaler is going to be our our breakfast speaker, and we have a number of people. We've sent out a save the date. If you haven't got it, please let me know, and if you'd like an invitation, also let us know. That's going to be sponsored by our folks in Minot. Linton Brooks is speaking on the 19th of May, and John Harvey has to be overseas, so we'll schedule John at another time to come and talk to us as well. In July, we're going to have Tom D'Agostino, who is a former head of NNSA, who's going to talk over at the Air Force Association on his perspectives from the private sector, reflecting on what lessons we can learn about how to interplay business and the industry folks with NNSA. On the 12th of June, we have Congressman Bridenstine, who will be talking at our next space breakfast. He is going to be talking about threats to our space assets and both what the House Armed Services Committee and Senate Armed Services Committee are doing on that, as well as what individual members such as himself are also trying to do in their own initiatives. Today we're very honored to have Colonel Janet Grondin, who I understand is going to be soon retiring, so I'm really honored to have her here to speak to us. As you know, she is the chief of the Spacelift Range and Network Systems Division, assigned to the Space and Missile Systems Center in Los Angeles Air Force Base. She is leading over 1,700 government and contractor personnel, modernizing and sustaining the worldwide Air Force satellite control network, as well as the nation's launch and test range system located at Vandenberg Air Force Base in Cape Canaveral in Florida. She manages execution of the Spacelift range system contract, the satellite control network contract, and the LTRS systems engineering and integration contract. And that means she is responsible for developing the LTRS integrated support work and the Space Acquisition Training Office that facilitates the standardized training systems for the space enterprise. We are honored to have you here today, Colonel, and so therefore on behalf of the Reserve Officers Association of America and the ROA, and NDIA and AFA, I want to thank you for coming here and speaking with us today. Would you all give a warm welcome to Colonel Janet Grondin?
All right, well, good morning. It's really my pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about our nation's launch ranges. I'm actually pretty impressed with how many people came today to talk about the range. It is a time right now where it's a really where it's really time to think strategically about where we're going. Where are we going with the where are we with the Spacelift ranges? Where are we going? And how are we going to support the booming commercial market and the NASA's return to manned space flight? So I think most of you, if you're here, you probably know about the ranges, so I don't have to spend a lot of time discussing it. But one of the things I do want to talk about is what I consider to be the range. So as I'm going through my speech, you'll know what I'm thinking of as the range architecture and what isn't. So the eastern range at Cape Canaveral, the western range at Vandenberg, they encompass a large area, both of them. And at both ranges, we have roughly 1,000 assets. Those assets are really, they're radars, telemetry receivers, optics, weather sensors, commanding sites, surveillance equipment. It's not the launch pad. And so sometimes folks think, anything that's at Vandenberg or anything that's at the Cape is really considered the range. But when I'm talking today about, about the ranges, I'm talking about specific instrumentation. And that instrumentation is placed up and down the seaboard to make sure that we can track the rockets as they fly, off to orbit, off of the Florida's Atlantic coast and California's Pacific coast. So that there's kind of a vast distance between all of those sensors. Some of them actually aren't ours, and we leverage, for example, off of California, we leverage the Navy's Point Mugu. And so all of that, the data that we collect is transmitted back to the launch head at Cape or Vandenberg to understand where the rocket's at. And that's done by a very highly reliable communication system. So this is a ground-based architecture. It's, it's been very successful over the years. It's been the cornerstone of how we conduct range operations at the Cape and Vandenberg. But it's also becoming, and it probably already is, outdated. So I think a lot of you know there's many customers in the range. Every one of our range customers is important. And they all have kind of unique needs. The Missile Defense Agency launches off of the range. Of course, space launch rockets. We have commercial, we have military, and civil customers. And we need to support, and the Air Force feels that we're the steward of the range. We want to support every mission that comes to the range. We want it to be successful, and we work very hard to make that happen. But likewise, each customer that comes to the range, really needs to support the Air Force and the mission to protect the public. And so, fundamentally, the ranges are about those two often synergistic but sometimes competing missions. We have to protect the public during a hazardous launch operation. It's just a mission for us that's a zero tolerance for failure. So the architecture that supports these dual missions, was really developed in the 1960s, back in the day when we were experimenting with rocket technology. And, I wasn't there, but and I'm not going to ask anybody who was there. I'm not going to try to figure that out. But, that was back in the day when we were launching rockets, trying to figure out, make sure that we knew what happened if they failed, make sure we knew how to fix it and move on. So we had, assets in a lot of areas to make sure that we could cover that part of the mission, plus, of course, the safety mission. But over time, that's become a very expansive ground architecture, and it's become a very complex architecture to perform that mission. And I don't think, and I think General Hyten doesn't think either, that we've kept pace with the customer in a lot of ways. So our vision, Air Force Space Command's vision, is to be the range of choice for all our launch and test customers. And we know to do that, we have to get with the times. We know that, the architecture we have is going to put us in a situation where we're irrelevant if we don't do something to change that. So I'm going to talk about a little bit today about some of the improvements that we've made to the architecture we have, what we've done to make sure it works. But then I'm going to talk a little bit about where we want to go with autonomous flight safety system. So at the end, I'll take any questions you might have. So I think everybody understands, the launch vehicles are dangerous, but they're most dangerous right at liftoff. That's before the majority of the booster fuel is expended and the vehicle is still close to Earth, close to population. So the way we do it today, we use radars, we use optics, and telemetry from the rocket to figure out where the booster is. Prior to the launch, the range safety team, they develop limit lines. So, essentially a corridor that that the rocket has to fly through. If it busts either one of the line, right or left lines, then we have a certified officer who has range equipment and the ability to push the button and destroy the rocket and the payload on it. And that is a mission that we won't compromise on. But the reality is, if some of those radars, some of the optics, the commanding, the communications, any of that stuff doesn't work, we don't launch. And so, because we will make sure that the public is safe. On the other hand, that drives cost to our user, and we know that. So just by way of kind of being complete here with the ranges, we also, in addition to that, we support other activities. We're a major test range. We routinely support flight operations, and for example, at Vandenberg, we have operations every day from Edwards that fly across our range. On the East Coast, at Trident, we have missile tests from the Trident. Those are just a few. So we have that mission as well. And then during launch and during test operations, not only do we do the public safety mission, do we do the tracking mission, but we also provide weather data, for example. And we have lightning detection and precipitation detectors. We have balloons that we launch to get the upper level winds. And so all of that data and all of the sensors associated with that is what I refer to when I'm talking about the range. So over time, we've modernized this ground infrastructure. We've improved the basic functions of all of these assets that are kind of strung together with the communication system. Last December, for example, we transitioned fully to GPS metric tracking for national security space launches. So what that does for us is it improves the accuracy of our position information, and it reduces our reliance on ground radars. We also recently delivered a safety system to the Western Range, and that allows us to rapidly reconfigure for various missions. And so ultimately giving us the ability to process more missions on the Western Range and increase our throughput. At both coasts, we delivered new weather data distribution systems. So no longer is the weather, do you have to actually have a modem plug-in to get your weather data? It now is available across the internet, for certified users. So we've fielded a lot of other improvements over the years in our command destruct and our tracking and our communications. It's this is all going on while we're launching 25 rockets a year and conducting over 1,200 tests a year. So so I think from the standpoint of are we doing anything about it, I think the answer is we're doing a lot about it. We've really been doing everything we can, but we are busy, and it is a lot of infrastructure to continue to modernize and keep up with. But in addition to modernizing architecture, we recently awarded the LIST contract, the Launch and Test Range Integrated Support Contract. And that was awarded in November of last year to RG Next, which is a joint venture between Raytheon and General Dynamics. This contract reduces the number of contracts that are required for a launch. So right in the legacy contract structure, you have an O&M contract at Vandenberg, an O&M contract at the Cape, and a sustainment contract that covered both coasts. So in order to launch on the West Coast, you dealt with one contractor. On the East Coast, you dealt with another. If it involved sustainment at all, you were dealing with potentially 3 contractors just to work your launch. And of course, that creates differences between the coasts. So now we have one contractor that does all 3, and that has allowed us to increase. I think it will. What the customer is going to see is increased responsiveness, and certainly has allowed us to reduce our costs on the range. And then finally, as we transition to that, we took the opportunity to restructure some work. So, all these modernization projects that we've recently fielded, most of them came from one contractor. And so what we did with the LISC is we pulled off some of the modernization. we pulled off the base operating support, and we started to tap into small business and what small business can do for us. So we're separately competing the base operating support contract for Vandenberg and the Cape. That's the range op support contract that's in source selection now. We also separately competed the communications upgrade at the East Coast, and that is just past PDR on its way to CDR. Also a small business set aside, so that was a good, robust competition. And we're in source selection for a similar contract on the Western Range, also a small business set aside. So as we're moving forward, we're trying to modernize with multiple teams of contractors so that we can make progress on multiple systems at the same time. But so what we found is that, you know, by competing some of these modernization projects as small business primes, we're able to really get the competition we want, get the interest we want, and really we're kind of right in the wheelhouse of some of the small businesses. So it's been a real good news story. So as far as, you know, what are we doing about the architecture today? I'd say that we are full court press in every area. We're trying to make sure that our contracts are structured properly. We're trying to be efficient on the O&M side. We're modernizing where we feel like we need to. And yet, you know, I will just tell you, it still feels like, you know, we're running really hard and we're just barely keeping up. So the challenge with today's architecture is really that it's tied to the safety mission. It's on the ground, but it's a can't fail mission. So, you know, what that really does, you know, internal to the Air Force is there's no margin for error. So I have to have the requirements right. It's a high reliability. The radar, the telemetry, everything has to be extremely high reliability, including the comm, to make sure that we can do that public safety mission. And so it takes us a while to make sure we get the requirements right. You get the requirements wrong, you build the wrong thing, and you just wasted time and money. So it takes us a while to get the requirements right. The test program has to be really rigorous. We have to wring that thing out. You know, our safety center was in test for years before we were able to use it. And even when we did use it, we had some red range time because of it. So the bar is really high for operational acceptance. And so as we try to develop these replacement capabilities, you know, the infrastructure continues to age, and so we're kind of on the clock. Now we're going to add to all that, we're going to add higher ops tempo, and you know, which makes it even harder to get on the range to make a modern, you know, to make or to field a modernized product. So these are the kind of the context of where we are and what's going to constrain us in the future. So our ops tempo is increasing, you know, between when we let the RFP for the list contract and when we awarded, we've seen an incredible spike just in commercial launches. The demand is going up. We need to respond to that. And our commercial launch customers have, you know, objective. Certainly, everyone has the objective of you know, promoting space, but and getting the mission done. But they also have the objective of making a profit. And so, you know, even within the government, you know, where we don't really have to make a profit, our budgets are declining. We can't afford to just spend, you know, a lot of money on things like the range, which is really, you know, in essence, a utility for space. So our customers today, they value reliability, they value predictability, they want to get their product to orbit at a reasonable cost, and we got to keep up with the times. So right now we're being really paced by the commercial customers. The commercial market, you know, they're actively pursuing autonomous flight safety technology, and you know, one of the benefits is that they're going to be able to decouple their rocket and their countdown and their assurance to launch from that ground infrastructure. So if we can get there, and the Air Force is going there as well, you know, we'll be able to reduce the reliability requirements of things on the ground. So if you want to bring your rocket, you want to get your telemetry data. It doesn't have to be range safety quality data. It can be, instead of 5 nines of reliability, you can have whatever nines you want. But that would be something that you could do with our new comm infrastructure that's going to be IP enabled and plug and play. So we have we have, I guess, done what we can with our current architecture, and we are trying to move forward. And the cornerstones of moving forward is really the autonomous flight safety system, going to a plug and play range with the new comm architecture. And then the efficiencies we're going to get from LISC, including some standard services that we think are going to be more easily defined for our customers, what's standard and what's unique. So the challenge with that, I think the biggest challenge with moving forward is going to be some of our customers aren't going to want to move forward. They're not going to want to go to autonomous flight. They have their system, they have their budget. They're not going to want to make that leap. Certainly in the Air Force, we are going to make that leap. Certainly in the commercial world, from what we can tell, everybody wants to make that leap and are already making it. So we'll have a few customers that we're going to have to work with. But ultimately, just like Microsoft can't support every operating system they ever built, the ranges aren't going to be able to support backward compatibility forever. So we're going to have to work with our users on moving towards autonomous flight safety. I think I've covered pretty much everything that I wanted to cover. I think I'd just like to leave with a couple of thoughts. One is, we have to look at the ranges. It's a hugely important capability, but ultimately it's just a utility. And the way we're looking at it in Space Command is kind of the way any customer looks at a utility. When your power bill goes up, and you don't care why. You don't care that the architecture's old or whatever. You really don't care. Your power bill's going up. If you're not using more power, that's a problem. If the price is too high, you start looking to do other things, solar cells, or you just cut back, or you do something else. Our ranges have been very predictable, very dependable for a number of years, but the cost of doing business is going up. And we have to realize that. So we know that if we don't change, we're essentially going to be irrelevant. So I think with that, I think I'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions for me. Yes, sir.
Question about next steps of modernization. And it's traditional ranges with large launch vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
As we see the architecture and some of the AOAs, they're studying smaller satellites and smaller launch vehicles and rapid reconstitution of assets. Do you see anything in the horizon in your 5-year plan that, or even beyond, for this kind of architecture that would accommodate that kind of growth and rapid response at the two ranges?
Yeah, I think I do. I mean, for one thing, immediately the LISC contract should help with that. Reducing the number of contractors that a customer has to deal with is going to help quite a little bit. Plus, it's a fixed price service contract, so it's pretty much this is what you get. You want more, we're going to have to figure out how to make that happen. Most of the small guys, they don't want any more. They just want to get on the range and off the range, right? So that'll help. But I think to really get the kind of throughput that some of the guys want, we have to go to something like autonomous flight. And the reason that works well is because it takes out of the count so you can basically do all of your preparation for the range safety ahead of time, and so it takes it out of the count so that you're not worried as you go through the count. You're not worried about 1,000 assets working properly, or some subset of that anyway. And I think that in and of itself will help us be able to turn it quicker. It's going to be different work, but I think you can hire more analysts, right? That's almost a little easier than to keep some of the assets going. So that is a big part of the plan. Mm-hmm.
We do a lot of work with Freedom of Information Act requests, and we recover less than 10% of our costs. What percentage of your costs do you recover from commercial launches, and how do you calculate how much they pay? Is it just variable costs? Are you recovering any part of the fixed cost?
Right. To date, and so I'm not an expert in this, and I'm going to kind of give you a top level because I don't have specific numbers. But to date, the overall concept has been direct costs associated with the launch, and not the sustainment portion. But we are looking at that as far as what's the basic service that the Air Force should provide versus a unique request from a customer. So we are looking at our charging policies right now, but that's how it's been in the past. Does that answer your question? Okay. We're making, I think they're recording, so yeah, I think you have to, yeah, I think that's the deal.
Yeah, Colonel, I was wondering, with the talk about autonomous track, I'm assuming you haven't had any big savings yet because not every user is using GPS tracking. Is there a target date where the range has said people will go over so you can start to recoup some of the costs of the other assets?
We are looking at that right now. We don't have a date, and that's kind of where the difficulty, or maybe just where we need to be delicate, I guess, with our customers, is we're going to have to talk to the various customers that it's going to be painful to go to autonomous flight safety. From the standpoint of the commercial industry, though, they're pressing forward, and I think we're going to probably see an autonomous flight safety system fly as a primary within the next 12 to 16 months. So so I think the technology is going to be demonstrated, but the sunset plan of current infrastructure, that type of thing, is going to have to be, it's going to take some time to work through.
Hi, I'm Pat Host with Defense Daily. When you were talking about range modernization, you kept mentioning small business set-asides.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if there's something that's attractive or advantageous to the Air Force as to working with these small businesses as opposed to large primes.
Yeah, that's a great question, Pat. A couple things that I've seen is, for one thing, the small businesses really want this work. And it's, so for example, the modernization out at the Eastern Range, it's less than $100 million. For the large businesses, that's a pretty small, piece of the work to go after. For the small businesses, that's a huge chunk. Also, just the prestige of working, an upgrade to the range is a big deal for small businesses. So what that really generates is a lot of competition and a lot of interest. And so it's, I think, been a real good thing for the Air Force to tap into that talent. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that it's been a good change, for sure.
I'm wondering what kind of modernization efforts makes a good fit for the small businesses, because as you know, the LIST contract has been went to joint venture of large primes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what we did with LISC is we pulled out all the base operating support, so everything that's associated with what we call a green range, anything that needs to make sure the range is ready to launch, that all went on the LISC contract. But there's a lot of other support activities that really have to get done. I always like to say, we got to feed the guys that are down at Ascension running the radar, right? If they don't get fed, they're not going to be ready to go. So there's a lot of other things that need to be done, and that's what we put into the range op support contract and did a small business, and are in the middle of a small business set aside competition right now. So that part works well, I think, for small business. The comm upgrades work really well for small business, with a lot of communication companies that are small businesses. We have a small business that's developing our command destruct. It's integrated by a large business, but the small business is the one that's actually building the hardware, building the software. It lends itself nicely because there aren't very many customers that need the kind of power we need for that type of a system. So I think it's because of the niche capabilities that we're modernizing, and it's because, because of the fact that you probably only need a few people to do some of what, to do the development for some of the things that we need. That really does lend itself nicely to a small business. Yep.
Hi, Mike Gruss from Space News. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit about some of the advantages of the list contract, and specifically any kind of savings targets, either dollar figure or percentage-wise, that you guys have seen. I know it's still early, but maybe targets you're shooting for, or what you've already seen so far.
Yeah, I can certainly talk to that. Compared to what we were paying for the same capability back in like 2008, and I kind of use that as a baseline one. That's the one we analyzed, but it's also it kind of represents the heyday. There were not a lot of constraints on the range, contracts at that point. We've saved about between $95 to $115 million a year, and that depends. It depends on the year. It depends on how many how many spares we buy that year. It depends on a lot of things. To get to that number, though, we let the RFP at about $50 million below those historical costs. So we drove, no matter who we picked, was going to be $50 million below that. So that's part of that 95 to 115, and then competition really drove the rest of it. So as far as our targets and what we expect, one of the big things we're trying to do is we're trying to hold that contract in place. It's fixed price, so we have we know what the savings are if we don't increase what we're looking for. Now that may not be possible. We may need to increase what we're looking for just based on the ops tempo and the changes on the range. But for the most part, we're gonna be holding at those savings levels for quite some time. Does that help, Mike? Okay.
Hi, Colonel Grondin.
Hi, sir.
Jim
Can't help
Armour
it.
with
Yeah, no,
Warfighter
I know,
ATK.
you're
Yeah, I
not
got
generally
it.
more,
I'm
but-
I'm just curious, in general, how you, no pun intended, how you would treat a commercial customer versus a national security or a NASA customer. I mean, what are some of the basic differences? And there may be different grades of commercial customers too, some that are advanced, launched several times, but others that are new. And they sort of don't know what to do. Can you just talk in general a little bit about how you approach those different clients?
Yeah, sure. When a new customer comes to the range, they submit requirements through our universal documentation system, and sometimes they just have a concept, and so the wing, if they want to launch off the East Coast, the 45th Space Wing will work with them to figure out, well, what do they really need, and then as their concept materializes, then they start into the process of writing the specific requirements, documents, and whatnot. But as far as what service is provided to either a launch customer from the commercial or the military, the government, NASA included, it's pretty much the same. Where I think we're going to go, though, in the future is if somebody comes to the range and they want a unique capability, we're going to be looking at charging for that. And so to some degree in the past, it's sort of been, okay, whatever you need, we're going to provide. I think as we move forward, it's going to be, we're going to have a basic service according to the contract we have in place. And then if you need something above and beyond that, we're going to need to talk. So don't know exactly how, we're just starting to think through that. I don't know exactly how that's going to work, but the one thing it probably will do is give some predictability, and we'll be able to predict ahead, for most of the customers if they want something that's specific and different than what's in the basic service. Okay. We're making it really hard on you. It's like
Maybe buying more than one microphone.
yeah, one per table. Yeah.
As the commercial sector and eventually the government moves to autonomous flight control systems and termination systems. What capabilities will remain essential on the ranges to assure that level of safety that you do now for the public and your Corps? So what is sort of irreducible
Right.
that's currently in place now?
Yeah, great question. So we do a lot of analysis on the range to come up with those limit lines I was talking about. That analysis still has to get done. We still have to, understand the software, IV&V the software. We're going to have to run tests. We're going to have to do certifications, run simulations. So all of that will still be done. Now that can be done well ahead of launch. So the majority of the public safety mission will be done probably ahead of launch. And then the day of launch, we're still working through what do we actually need on the range, and those will drive reliability requirements. One of the things that we're looking at is situation awareness. How much situation awareness do we need? If a rocket, for example, does destroy itself, we have some notifications that need to be made. So, we can't be finding out, a couple hours later, or we can't, we need to. And when we make those notifications, we have to have some data. We can't just, make a statement. So, all of that's being worked through right now as far as what it will be. But I can almost guarantee you it will be a lot less than what we have today. So more to come on that. I don't have a specific answer for you, but.
Colonel, I have a question. What do you think Congress needs to do that they haven't yet looked at in terms of legal law changes in the National Defense Authorization Act or other legislation to kind of catch up? Because a lot of the legislation is based on technology and standards and processes that are, as you know, getting old. And if you're going to change, you're going to need help. What would you kind of lay out are some of the challenges that Congress is going to look at?
That's a great question. I don't know if it's Congress or if it's internal to the DoD, but our charging policies for what you pay for as the government and what the user pays for needs some work. So I'll just go down an example of autonomous flight safety. If somebody is a holdout and, we want to go to autonomous flight safety and we're spending, I think my budget for the range just for modernization alone is like $100 million a year. And we decide, most of that's going into the ground infrastructure that we're going to replace with autonomous flight safety. At some point, I need to be able to say, we're not going to support you anymore if you don't want to change to autonomous flight safety, then you, customer, are going to have to pick up the bill. And right now, it's very difficult for us to do that. Some of that is internal to the DoD, and our policy is internal to the DoD, but that's where I think the major policy push is going to have to come from. Don't know if we're going to need legislation for it, but we're definitely going to need support. You say legislation, Colonel Warwick? Yeah.
Congress calls that supplement of appropriation, and so they have to be in the middle of it.
Okay. Yeah, so I do, we got to get to a point that my biggest concern is we can't let the infrastructure continue to grow and grow and grow. We can't afford it. And yet every customer with their unique needs that needs their mission supported, we don't have enough not willpower. We don't have enough as a government, we're not always all together about whether they pay or they don't pay. And then what ends up happening a lot of times is the government sucks it up. And so we've really got to look at that. Where is that line that, that's reasonable for the taxpayer to pay, and where's the line that's reasonable for now some of the commercial companies or just users in general? Doesn't even have to be a commercial company. Where is it appropriate for them to pay? Here, I'll help.
Is it a test range or an operational range?
It is both. Yes.
Just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, in fact, this speech was titled "Whose range is it?" Right? And,
That's a good question.
And I thought about trying to tackle that in my speech, and I thought, nah, it's too hard, you know. I mean, because there's just so many different influences, and it all comes down to how you configure it. But what's a real testament, I think, to the operators of the ranges is they always make it work. And that's the government and the contractors together. They always make it work, and it is pretty impressive to see.
Take that away.
That's right.
The question's been asked about what can congressmen and senators do along those lines. We suffered through last couple of years sequestration.
Mm-hmm.
Are we better postured if we can't get our way out of sequestration? And are there some impacts that are going to happen if they bring it to bear?
Right. So I think we're better postured right now from a operations, maintenance, sustainment, labor contract kind of position. Because of where the budget is now for the LIST contract. It's part of the weapon system sustainment budget. That's a pretty good place for it, and so I think we're well postured from that standpoint. But if we lose modernization money, for example, we could easily throw off the comm upgrades, and those need to get done because not only do we want to get to a plug and play architecture, but we got to get off of our really old technology. I mean, there's no spares for those comm systems anymore. I think we bought up the ATM spares across, worldwide. So we have a limited lifetime for that. We have to make that work. Command destruct. We have a worst actor on the Eastern Range. If we don't replace that, or we get our budget cut, that's gonna. And we don't have autonomous flight safety. We're just not going to be able to launch if that fails. So, these are some of the things that are, they're very real. We're kind of on the hairy edge of if some of these modernization programs aren't successful, we don't have a good backup plan. So, I think the other thing, we're looking at the comm building out at the Eastern Range, the famous XY building. That's coming up. If we can't get that replaced here pretty soon, it's been a real rat's nest of of wires and whatnot, and if we can't get that replaced pretty soon, we don't have an alternative. So I think as moving forward, support for the budget that we put in is absolutely critical. We spend a lot of time prioritizing what we need on the ranges. And when we say we need it, we really do need it. Because there's a whole laundry list of other things we need that we're not doing because we prioritize the highest ones.
Real quick, if you launch out of Kodiak or Wallops, do you coordinate with them, and is there a handoff at all, or are they totally autonomous from Eastern and Western Range? Because we hear some of the dialogue about people are looking at wanting to launch from there because there's less competition on the range.
They are totally separate, but we do leverage each other's resources sometimes. So, if they, like Kodiak, I think sometimes uses Vandenberg assets, just like we use the Navy assets when we launch. So they have an inter-range, function to be able to support each other. But
are they dependent on you to actually
No.
do their launch?
I don't think so,
Their
no.
scheduling?
No, not their scheduling, for sure.
Because do you have command of your asset,
Mhm.
and you have to hand it off to them
No.
to utilize it?
No, they have their own assets. So it's just, if they want to use a telemetry dish or something on their way to orbit, they might schedule up something from Vandenberg, for example. And we do that too. On the East Coast, we use Wallops. We use some of their telemetry assets, but not their command function, if that makes sense. Okay.
Man, back on legislation, we passed the Cooperative Space Launch Act a few years ago. Have you seen any interest from industry in that? And if not, have you heard why?
You're talking about industry can invest in the ranges they want. No, we haven't seen any interest in that. Why I think is I think because of the way it's structured, industry would turn their funds over to us, and I think that's why nobody's doing it. What's that?
The appropriation requirement.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Now, we've had folks that want to bring their own stuff to the ranges, and that's where that low reliability, high reliability thing makes a difference. If it has to be, if somebody wants to bring something to the ranges and it has to feed the range safety display and the MIFCO decision and all that, then we have to go through all the certification and whatnot to use it. If they just want to bring it, though, like a telemetry dish and track the rocket, doesn't feed range safety, then, when we get to the plug-and-play architecture, it should be pretty easy just to give them authority to connect. They can get whatever data they want. We don't necessarily need it for range safety, and so that's one of the areas where we want to try to get to, and it's probably more realistic for a company to bring their own piece of equipment rather than invest in something we're doing. So, okay, any other questions? All right, well, thanks again for having me. Appreciate it.